Welcome back to Following Know It On, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 20, and we are doing chapters 64 through 69 with a spotlight on Dalinar this week. Last week was Kaladin. If you missed that one, I highly suggest going to watch that one. We talked for quite a while about Kaladin and what he does through these chapters. But this week is Dalinar. So with that in mind, Paul, what are your two words for Dalinar with this section?
Yeah, so I do have two words this week, not just one.
Okay.
I'm super excited to talk about Dalinar, and I promised that I wrote these before Eliot's last week. I wrote my words for Kaladin and Dalinar after finishing reading the chapters. But my words for Dalinar are selfless and calm.
Selfless and calm. I'll be interested to hear what that one's about.
Yes, exactly. And I do know that last week, Eliot used selfless to describe Kaladin, and I thought that was kind of funny. But I promise that we wrote that without knowing.
Eliot, what are your two words?
We do write these without telling each other, and the episode has finally come. I joked last week that we almost had the same word, but this week I thought I was being cute and funny by reusing selfless. So my two words for this episode are selfless again and priceless.
All right, let's discuss these. All right.
Nice.
Let's talk about these words for these chapters, or the Dalinar section of these chapters, I should say. Eliot, you want to explain your two words?
Yeah, so my two words for this episode were selfless and priceless. And I'm cheating a little bit and reusing selfless for this section because I really felt like selfless was such a great word for all of these chapters. And Paul, apparently you felt similarly because we finally picked the same word for an episode, which I think is hilarious. I thought that might happen at some point, but I feel like Dalinar acts very selflessly in these chapters, and it's very admirable. And on the flip side of that, we see Sadeas doing the exact opposite of that, being so incredibly selfish that it is a polar opposites there between Dalinar and Sadeas. And then priceless, because I love the end of this section in chapter 69, and we're going to talk about it when we get the question of what is the price of a man's life. The answer is priceless.
What is a man's life worth? I will read
Exactly.
that quote later, don't you worry. Paul, you want to explain your two words?
I do. I really want to explain them. So selfless, similar to what Eliot was saying here, we see a great display from Dalinar, and kind of, he's ready to go out fighting. He's ready to lay his life down, and maybe not by his choice in this context with what Sadeas does. But we definitely see a display from Dalinar throughout this that he's not concerned about his own self-worth or things like that. He's willing to lay down even the most valuable things that he owns to do what's right. And that's incredible. With calm, Trevor was a little curious about that. I actually would like to wait to describe that or explain that until we get to chapter 69.
Okay. Sounds like a deal.
Okay.
We can do that. All right. Chapter 64 and chapter 65. From a Dalinar perspective, we kind of glossed over these chapters last week because they're very Dalinar heavy. And there are a few things that I would like to highlight here, even though these aren't the these aren't the reason why we're here, to be honest. These chapters are a means to an end to chapter 68 and 69. But there are a couple things I want to highlight. But first, Elliot, you have a quote. I believe this quote has to do with his conversation with Navani.
Yes.
Is that where you're coming from? So go ahead and start with that, because that comes first.
Yeah, so Dalinar is talking with Navani, and he mentions to her, he says, "I'm a weak man." And she responds back, basically, "No, you're not. You're not a weak man, Dalinar." And he says, "I am. But weakness can imitate strength if bound properly, just as cowardice can imitate heroism if given nowhere to flee." And that was it was a head scratcher for me. It got me thinking, and I think it's a very philosophical thought here from Dalinar, but I kind of like it, because everyone looks at Dalinar and they see this incredibly strong, disciplined man who's he's got a lot of self-control. He's got a lot of both mental and physical strength. But inside, he feels like he's weak, and he feels like he can see all the places where he's giving in, where his armor, his metaphorical armor is starting to crack, and so he feels like weak. And so from his perspective, he says, "I'm weak, but it comes across as strength." And that's an interesting paradox there that I can't quite wrap my brain around, but it's fun to think about.
I don't think anyone in the work camps. Well, actually, I take that back. There are certainly people who would whisper that Dalinar is getting weak because he is losing his taste for battle. He's not wanting to go on bridge runs. From an exterior perspective, it might look like he's getting weak. But Adolin, over the course of these last 900 pages, has had the opposite reaction. Adolin is actually resolved that he's not getting weak. So if you were to ask Adolin, he'd certainly be the first to say that no, Dalinar is very strong, and he proves that to himself later, as Adolin has a nice maturity moment later. But it's interesting that Dalinar thinks he's weak.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dalinar and Navani are having a conversation. I noticed that Paul's kind of not saying anything because he's perhaps Dalinar and Navani biggest critic here, but it's okay. It's okay. You don't have to like him. But they're having a conversation, and right in the middle of it, the horns blow, and there is a chasm fiend sighted on the tower, and Dalinar decides to go. But before they actually start going, Sadeas rides up to their war camp, and Adolin, Dalinar, and Sadeas all have a conversation. And there's something here that I want to highlight, which you probably missed on your first read through because you didn't know what was coming, obviously. But Sadeas is, no matter what he claims at the end of 69 or the middle of 69, when Dalinar confronts him later, Sadeas is pushing for as many House Kholin deaths as he can get. He knows that he is going to betray Dalinar here if he gets the opportunity, which he does. But not only is he trying to get rid of Dalinar, he is trying to get rid of as many of his soldiers as he can. Because Sadeas is the one who pushes for Dalinar to... He asks him how many soldiers he can take at a maximum. And Dalinar says, well, at a short notice, I can get 8,000. And Sadeas says, that will have to do. So Sadeas is wanting as many lives lost as possible here, which you may not pick up on your first read through because you don't know what's coming. Any thoughts?
Yes, because I did notice that. So I read through these chapters 2 times, and on my second read through, this chapter is shown a lot brighter. I guess, or specifically with the moments with Sadius. I had my grand apology for saying Sadius wasn't too bad
Mm-hmm.
last episode. I definitely ate my words there. But with that, it was really, really good job, honestly, of Sadius to deceive Dalinar here. It was very well planned out and very convincing because when you're reading that, especially not knowing that that's going to happen, it's very earnest and a very legitimate strategy of we're gonna pool all these men and we're gonna wipe out a huge amount of Parshendi and really be a major point for this war. And you know Dalinar's like, great, yeah, let's do this. Like, this is a great plan we have here at this specific location where the Parshendi wouldn't be able to retreat so well. And yeah, and then you see later on the second read through of how this is just a big setup and a way to get Dalinar just completely wiped out and with as many men as possible.
Sadius is a master strategist. I've learned that over the course of these chapters and before. We even saw before where Sadius maneuvered Elokar and Dalinar in order to get himself into the position of High Prince of Information, and he's very good at that politicking, if you will, of manipulating this scenario in his own favor. And we see that here where he plays on Dalinar's weaknesses, he plays on Dalinar's strengths in order to just sucker him in on this huge, what was the phrase that Kaladin used from last time? Treachery on the grand scale, where he, like you're talking about, Trevor, gets as many soldiers as possible to fall into this trap, and his intention is to get every single one of them killed.
In this same scene, and we'll talk about Adolin a little bit later as well, but Adolin is actually one of the ones in this meeting that finally convinces Dalinar to go. Adolin sees what Sadius is saying and says, yes, this is it. This is how we change the war. This is how we start winning, like you're saying, like you want, Dalinar. This is, we need to go. We need to get all of our guys and go. And so Sadius has completely fooled Dalinar and Adolin. And Adolin's been the loudest critic of Sadius so far. So that's how sold the House Cullen is on this.
Yeah, I actually think Adolin deserves a little more of a highlight than we give him at times. So these chapters are primarily about Dalinar, but we've seen a lot of development with Adolin over the book, and I think it's super important. Not just here, we really see him in this moment getting behind his father and really advising what he views as right and what they should do. And given the circumstances that they're in, I think Adolin is making a great call in advising Dalinar, hey, we need to do this. Like, this is important, and this could be a major turning point of this war. It doesn't work out super well, but I don't think we can fault Adolin for that. Obviously, Sadius is the one with the problems here. But we've really seen Adolin grow from kind of an apathetic teenager almost to, an honorable young man who's really grown to support his father Dalinar. And we see that especially highlighted in the later chapters here, where he won't leave Dalinar. He's not going to retreat without him and things like that. And Kaladin kind of gets on to him. But I do think Adolin's progression is really, really awesome to see.
I will come back to that more here in a little bit. Chapter 66 is a big Adolin moment, I think. But before we get there, chapter 65, they've decided to go on the bridge run to the tower, and they know the Parshendi are already going to be there. So Sadius sets up 32 of his bridges on one plateau and 8 on another for Dalinar. And chapter 65 is, especially the first half of the chapter, is a very technical chapter. It's talking about the dynamics of the tower, the strategy of Sadeas landing first, Dalinar pushing up through. They're going to push back together, so you get a very good mental image of what's happening, and it's very clear to you what's happening when Sadeas leaves. It's all set up very well. Dalinar has 0 bridges left. They're all Sadeas's, and that's the main goal of Chapter 65. Any thoughts on Chapter 65?
There's a moment in Chapter 65 where Dalinar is struggling again with the concept that we've actually talked about recently, and that is Dalinar justified in even going on these plateau assaults with Sadeas? He even thinks to himself, he has one of his codes is don't ask your men to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. And so he's kind of wrestling with the idea of, by using these bridges, am I doing that? Am I asking these bridgemen to do something that I wouldn't do myself? And he draws the line at, I won't let bridgemen supporting my army do that, but I will go alongside Sadeas, who is doing that. And he wrestles with that, and he kind of compares it to soldiers. He kind of thinks for a little bit, well, is it the same thing as soldiers charging into battle and taking a rain of arrows? But I think he ends up at probably the same place that I do. It's not really the same. It's a soldier has at least some armor on and some protection and a hope of getting there and surviving. And as we saw when we first encountered bridgemen and the whole concept of using bridgemen as distractions and shields for the soldiers, it is not the same thing to send unarmed, unprotected men ahead of the protected army. And I don't know. I still am at the place where I don't really have a great answer for this, whether I can condone what Dalinar is. And I think he might be in the same place too. I think he's wrestling with this and doesn't know if he's really okay with this, but he kind of has this argument on the front lines. It's a little late for him to change his mind at that point.
Well, rest assured that he won't be working with Sadeas' bridge crews in the future. So,
nope.
So we don't really have to answer that question. Not the same way.
That's true. I think the most important thing about Chapter 65 in my eyes is it's really the final escalating chapter going into this, where it sets the scene for the major problem and the major thing here, which is Sadeas' betrayal of Dalinar. And so it sets up this fight scene, and it's all getting started. The war is going as planned. And then suddenly Sadeas leaves, and Dalinar realizes this isn't what was planned. This is a grand betrayal, and now they have no way out. And so, yeah, this chapter, if I remember correctly, it wasn't that long. It was kind of the last little setup chapter to really escalate the problems at hand. And it did a very good job of that. Like Trevor said, it was kind of technical, describing this specific location and what that means for Dalinar as Sadeas runs off with all of his bridge crews, leaving him stranded.
The other thought that I had in 65, which actually carries over into 66, is, well, first I'll say, Paul, you mentioned in our last episode last week your huge apology for your consideration of the villain in this book, and I got to say I did have a kind of a moment when we hit this chapter and realized that we were looking for a villain. We were trying to decide who the most upfront villain in The Way of Kings was. Well, we just found him. It is unquestionably Sadeas at this point. Sadeas is the villain of this story, and he's kind of been riding under the radar a little bit. We always knew he was a bit of a villain. We always knew that he was twisted and a bit evil, but there was always that little glimmer of hope. All of that hope gets dashed right at the end here of 65 into 66, and it is definitive that Sadeas is the villain.
And I really feel what makes this so definitive here is how premeditated it was,
Yes,
and
exactly.
how he has this cover up of, oh, things were looking grim, so we had to retreat. I apologize, but this was in the best interest of our country's future, you know?
Right.
And I feel like that scapegoat is what makes Sadeas truly just like maniacal and evil here. And yeah,
Yep.
just truly despicable there.
Yep. But the thought actually that I had, that was all intro to my thought for 65 into 66, is the question that Dalinar is now asking himself about his visions, because the one definitive thing that he's come out of his visions with, the one, at least what he thought was clear direction, was trust Sadeas. And up until this point, I've definitely been on the side of the fence of the visions are good. They're giving Dalinar information. He's learning about the past. He's learning about Noadon. We should trust these visions. But now, all of that gets thrown into a huge suspicion bucket. The visions told him very specifically to trust Sadeas. He did so and gets hugely betrayed. Loses thousands of lives of his soldiers. Almost loses his own life. All because he went all in on trusting Sadeas. And I even flip back to that chapter of that vision to try and defend that vision, to try and find some evidence to say, oh, well, maybe Dalinar misunderstood it. Maybe he didn't understand it correctly, and the vision wasn't actually telling him to trust Sadeas. But what I found was actually the opposite. I want to go back and read for a second the part of that vision where that happens. So here he's in the vision. He's talking to one of like the people he's met in the vision, but it's one of those instances where it's clearly not that person speaking to him. It's this voice that reoccurringly comes and talks to him in the visions. And here's what it says. So Dalinar asks, should I continue to trust Sadeas? Yes, the being said. This is important. Do not let strife consume you. Be strong. Act with honor, and honor will aid you. Dalinar's honor is exactly what Sadeas plays on to get him into this trap. We talked last episode about Kaladin overhears Sadeas saying, I told you it was your honor that was going to get you killed one day. It's almost like the vision was laying the bait for that trap that Sadeas closes at the end there. This is looking really grim for me in relation to should Dalinar trust the visions. What do you guys think about this?
I'm really glad you brought this up. I actually kind of want to counteract your statements here. So what we see in chapter 69, I'm not going to dive too deep into it because we will get there, and that's an outstanding chapter. But I don't think any of the events that happened there would have happened if Dalinar did not trust Sadeas. He did trust Sadeas, and Sadeas led him astray almost to their deaths. But it does come to a crazy ending point there. Kaladin and his crew and all the bridgemen, are let to freedom, and I don't think that would have happened if Sadeas or if Dalinar never trusted Sadeas and never worked with them to begin with, which I think in the grand scheme of things is going to have a much bigger part to tell rather than Dalinar's life being at risk because he trusted Sadeas.
That is a great point, Paul. I love that. And I actually, a small part of me did think about that of, is this voice in the visions playing an even larger game that we don't even know about? Did the vision intentionally lay this bait to let Dalinar get trapped by Sadeas in order to set up all the events that you're referring to? And maybe those things needed to happen. Maybe Dalinar needed to be betrayed in this moment so that he would encounter Kaladin, so that he would have this opportunity to save all the bridgemen. And maybe Kaladin would not have even gotten to where he was at because of all this. Kaladin would not have had that moment where he had to charge with the bridgemen and say the words, the second ideal of the Knights Radiant, and really move up in his abilities and whatnot. So that's an interesting question, and I hope that's the case. I really, really, really hope that's the case, but I can't help but think of how many lives were spent to do that, of how many soldiers Dalinar lost to get to this point, if that was the case. So I'm not sure. I'm really not sure.
That is a great point, and it is very sad with all the lives there. But also, I can't help but think about all the lives that have just been freed because of this.
Totally.
You know, the soldiers losing their lives because of Sadeas's betrayal is horrible, and that's definitely not something to overlook. But the rippling effect and truly the selflessness, like we both thought from Dalinar there,
Definitely.
ended up freeing many lives as well. And so I think that's going to have a major effect. And obviously, we know that these bridgemen are capable of incredible things. And so we'll kind of see how that one plays out. That's definitely something to kind of keep a pin in and see about those dreams, if they were legit or if they were leading him astray.
I totally agree.
So, in chapter 66, Sadeas has already pulled away, and Adolin kind of loses his head, rightfully so, as you can be angry about this, and he just starts yelling at Dalinar. He is so frustrated with him, and he just starts yelling, and I'll read a little bit of it. "I told you," Adolin continued to yell, lowering his arm from his face and slicing into the next pair of Parshendi just before they landed their hammers on him. "I said he was an eel." "I know," Dalinar yelled back. We walked right into this," Adolin continued, shouting as if he hadn't heard Dalinar. "We let them take away our bridges. We let them get us onto the plateau before the second wave of Parshendi. We let him control the scouts. We even suggested the attack pattern that would leave us surrounded if he didn't support us." "I know." Dalinar's heart twisted inside of him. Adolin is so furious with the situation, with Dalinar, with Sadeas, of course, but he's taking his anger out on Dalinar right here. He is just screaming at him over the sound of the battle, and Dalinar has nothing to say in return. He's taking all of the blame on himself here. However, a little bit further down, Adolin kind of realizes something. "This is my fault," Dalinar said. "I never should have risked our house for these foolish dreams." "No," Adolin said. He sounded surprised at himself for saying it. "No, father, it's not your fault." A little bit further down. "Would he have had himself change? Yes. He could have been more cautious. He could have been warier of Sadeas. But would he have given up on the codes? Would he have become the same pitiless killer he had been as a youth? No. Did it matter that the visions had been wrong about Sadeas? Was he ashamed of the man that they, and the readings from the book, had made him become? The final piece fell into place inside of him, the final cornerstone, and he found that he was no longer worried. The confusion was gone. He knew what to do. At long last, no more questions, no more uncertainty. He reached up, gripping Adolin's arm. "Thank you." The forgiveness step here is really cool to me. I really enjoy this little back and forth from Adolin. They've stepped back from the front lines of the battle, and Adolin forgives his father and doesn't blame him for this, even though Dalinar has already blamed himself for this. And Dalinar gets peace here, that he gets to face, which there's a quote here in a little bit, but he gets to face what he assumes to be his death with a clear conscience of, no, I made the right decision. Was I a little bit blind? Yes. But I made the right decision. This is not actually my fault, and I would not have changed anything. It's really good for both of them.
For Dalinar, I agree. This is amazing. I highlight in my book with different colors, and I have one specific color for sections that I enjoy or I felt were really powerful. I highlighted almost an entire 2.5 pages here because this was so awesome in Dalinar's journey and Dalinar's story. And he comes to this point where he realizes through the help of Adolin, as we get that powerful moment you were just talking about, where Adolin forgives him and says, I would not have you change. Is this your fault? Is it Sadeas's fault? Does it matter? The answer is pretty much no, it doesn't, because we have become who we are, and we shouldn't change that. Even if that would have gotten us out of this, even if by being a little more sneaky or distrusting or manipulative, we could have prevented this, it still would not have been worth it because it would have sacrificed who we are and who we have become. And that is so, so awesome. It culminates for me in a quote at the very end of the chapter here. Dalinar, I won't read the whole thing because it's kind of long, but Dalinar starts to kind of almost talk to himself, but then it describes it as his voice growing louder, almost into this, I imagine it as a speech, a motivational speech to himself, to Adolin, to the soldiers around him in order to perform this final charge to get them out of this. But it culminates in this quote that I thought was so impactful. He's talking about Sadeas specifically. He says, I am not ashamed of what I have become. Other men may debase themselves to destroy me. Let them have their glory, for I will retain mine. So cool, so good of how he recognizes Sadeas is destroying his own honor in doing this. Should Dalinar sacrifice his honor to prevent that? No. Dalinar is going to cling to his honor. He's going to stand firm in what he believes in, even if that means he's going to get that used against him. Even if that means that Sadeas is going to be able to manipulate him and betray him. Dalinar is going to stay true to what he believes, and that is really inspiring.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Elliot, because that, I think, was my favorite quote from the Dalinar side of these chapters, that retaining his honor. I also wanted to say with what Trevor was saying, I mentioned before about Adolin's progression through this story, and he's almost like an unsung hero, a little bit. His progression is not near as direct or as large as our main characters, but it definitely is notable. I think if we had Adolin from the beginning of the books in this situation, there would have been a lot more grief and unsettled behavior. You know, he probably would have been way more wrapped up in how am I going to get out of here alive and see my girlfriend or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
But he's really understanding and ready to fight side by side with Dalinar and do what they can. And I think that shows a great deal of maturity from him.
We talked last episode about movie moments, or if you were to adapt this story for the big screen, whether it's TV or movie, this would be another big moment of Dalinar delivering this speech as they make their final charge through the Parshendi army to try and get to Kaladin's bridge, which he's gotten to the gap. Trevor, you talked last time about horns and how you could make that as an element. This is like the answer to that. This is Dalinar getting up and delivering this, we are who we are and we will never change motivational speech to charge through the army. This is the moment that would give me chills as you're watching it, seeing them charge into the opposing army.
It's the Aragorn in front of the Black Gate speech, right? The
Exactly.
a day may come type of thing. And at this point in the book, when he's giving this speech, they don't even see Kaladin yet. This is we're going to fight to the end. They don't even have an escape route yet. We're going to fight to the end because that's what we do. It's not even a hope speech, honestly. It's a resolve speech. We're going to, we got ourselves here. We're going to fight till the end because it's the journey that matters, not the destination.
Totally agree.
So I'm gonna go ahead and bring it out now, but I'll explain further later. One of my 2 words is calm, and part of that is because of this scene here. There's the dialogue between Adolin and Dalinar, where basically Dalinar just says, "I know," and it's a very frustrating moment. But through all of that, Dalinar keeps his cool, and there's a much bigger reason for that word in chapter 69, but this definitely is telling, and it's incredible to see Dalinar keep a level head through everything that's going on. He's being just berated by lines of Parshendi at this point, but he doesn't even seem like angry or anything. He has a level head and he's doing what he can, and it's honestly remarkable.
It's what's required of a leader.
Exactly.
All right, before we get to chapter 69, we should touch a little bit on chapter 68. And there's a couple moments from Dalinar's perspective, actually. And I'll bet that Eliot is going to want to talk about this. The Parshendi Shardbearer talks to Dalinar, and Dalinar, it takes him a second to realize that it's in Alethi. The Shardbearer is talking to him in Alethi. And Eliot, do you want to take it from here?
Before I talk about that Shardbearer, I want to note something really quick. Both in the course of this battle, both Kaladin and Dalinar notice something about the Parshendi. They both independently notice that the Parshendi fight quite honorably. Kaladin notices that the Parshendi don't attack like the wounded adversary. They don't face a line of spearmen and pick the weakest one and attack them. They do the opposite. They fight the strongest one. They come to him, to Kaladin in the line, and attack him almost as if it's a, duel of honor or something like that. Of no, we're gonna take you down man to man. We're not gonna try and pick off your weakest as you go, which you would almost maybe you could argue would be a wise battle tactic. No, you should strike the enemy where they're weak first, but this is a very honorable way to fight of, no, I'm going to face you where you're strongest and face you man to man. Dalinar notices that the Parshendi Shardbearer also fights with honor, and he doesn't try and use dirty tactics. He even salutes Dalinar after this whole thing is done. Dalinar has made it back across the chasm. They're retreating. They've gotten away. The Parshendi Shardbearer salutes him with his sword as they're leaving, almost as if to say, like, well fought or something like that. I'm not quite sure if that's what that was intended to be, but that was kind of what I got from it. So it seems clear that the Parshendi, we've mentioned this before, are maybe a lot more capable and honorable and wise, perhaps, than we give them credit for. But all that to lead into this rather epic showdown with Dalinar and the Shardbearer. This is the classic, you almost made it out of trouble, but here comes the actual final boss right here with the Shardbearer kind of stomping onto the battlefield. And in this battle, as you mentioned, we get this really intriguing moment where the Parshendi speaks Alethi to Dalinar, And what he says is even more intriguing. He says, "It is you. I have found you at last." And I just paused when I read that, thinking, what? What does that mean? We haven't seen any kind of evidence before about the Parshendi like hunting for Dalinar or like a price on Dalinar's head. They don't seem to pay him any specific attention like they do Kaladin, other than the fact that he's a shard bearer at the front of the army. They're all going to come attack him. It doesn't seem like, they don't have a special name for Dalinar like they do Kaladin, or at least not one that we know of. So why is this Parshendi shardbearer seem to recognize him or seem to, for this to be an important moment for him? And the only thing I could think about would be Dalinar has interacted with the Parshendi before all of this. He was with Gavilar when they first met the Parshendi, and he was a shard bearer at that time. And so maybe something occurred then to where this shard bearer knows Dalinar or knows of Dalinar or something like that, knows of maybe the Blackthorn, knows of his reputation. I don't know. I'm really confused by this, to be honest.
And it's not like Dalinar's been hiding either. He's been on plenty of plateau runs, and Dalinar thinks he's fought this shard bearer or seen this shard bearer before, like this specific one. So it's not like he's been hiding or anything like that.
I actually have another theory, though, mini theory thought, not really a theory, but a thought on this. I wonder, Dalinar is Gavilar's brother, right? Brother? What if this shardbearer is actually mistaking him for Gavilar? Now, this seems a little bit silly because the Parshendi, as far as we know, ordered Gavilar's assassination. That's the whole reason why we're here. You would think they would know Gavilar is dead. But part of me kind of wonders what if this guy thinks that this is Gavilar? And maybe Gavilar did something. We know that Gavilar had some kind of interaction with the Parshendi that led to something. They had him assassinated for a reason, we think. So perhaps this is somehow tied into that, but that doesn't seem to quite make sense either. I don't know.
Yeah, either there's like a complete disdain for the Kolins entirely, or I never thought about that. That does seem a little silly, but also it makes sense as to why they would be looking for Dalinar or Gavilar specifically. That is really intriguing. This is something that I'm definitely going to remember with this Parshendi Shardbearer saying that I have found you at last.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely got to be a little glimpse into their motive of what's going on here, because we don't really understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But, that has to be a big sign.
Yeah, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is telling us is coming either, but I agree with you. This seems very important into the whole puzzle of who are the Parshendi and why are they doing what they're doing. This is going to be an important piece of that puzzle. I just don't know how yet.
It's definitely the ominous, but there's some greater motive. This isn't just a mindless war. There's some motive or something that the Parshendi want, or something.
Yeah.
There's definitely something that they're searching for specifically.